Session become Azure and Microsoft 365 management and governance superhero.
Welcome everyone. Well, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Platinum Ones and community sponsor as well. And thank you for being here today. So today we're two of us. My name is Sasha, and I'm doing Azure and security. I'm an Azure MVP and MCT as well, and have some certifications under my belt as well. And the second speaker is.
Hi everyone, my name is Mustafa Taraman. I work as a system engineer and solution architect at Authority Partners. I'm also Microsoft Azure MVP. I've been one for last 5 years. Similar to Sasha, I'm also very certified in Microsoft technologies, and I've been Microsoft certified trainer for last 8-9 years.
Excellent. So first of all, we have a lot to cover, but of course, it's governance is a huge topic, and we won't be able to cover all the things that we'd like to. But anyway, the good things is that if nothing else, you will be more knowledgeable about the governance in Azure and Office and Microsoft 365. Sorry, I'm automatically saying Office because it was that from the beginning. But anyway. For good governance, it's important to know all the important tools that we'll mention today. And since the Azure is actually is designed for effective governance because it has multiple tools that can help us in governing all the features that we have in infrastructure, so we can enforce compliance and actually scale at a greater speed. So we have different tools like Azure Policy Blueprints and cost management, etc., etc. But we will tell you about that a little bit more.
Okay, so on the traditional approach, when we are talking about IT governance, it's basically speed versus control. When we want to enable development, and by development, it usually inclines that we are enabling our users to have self-service, to provision some kind of resources themselves, to have a production access, to have a rapid release, to increase speed of our processes. We are demanding speed, and usually when we are allowing a lot of those functionalities to our users, control is the thing that is suffering. So basically, we are kind of slacking on the policies, security, cost management, and these things usually collide in those sort of environments. When we are enabling users to do most of the things themselves, we are losing control. People will probably create resources that are not needed, that are probably going to affect both security and cost management. And on the other hand, if we are trying to enforce those policies, security, and cost management control, then we are not enabling users to have the speed and efficiency they are seeking.
Exactly, and I would just like to jump in. Mustafa, it's like the triangle. You have the speed, you have the cost, and you have the governance, and so you can have three of them, of course. Don't you agree with that?
Yeah, of course. So basically, what happens, and it's often seen in cloud environments, that we are often losing control of what is inside our Azure subscriptions and what is going on. Fortunately for us, using certain tools and built-in model governance that Azure offers, we kind of can have both speed and control at the same time. We can enable people to do what they want. We can enable users to get faster development, self-provisioning, to request the resources when they need them and get them right away. On the other hand, we can still apply policies, maintain the security rules, and have some kind of cost management as well. Keep that cost under certain control. This cost is especially important when we're discussing this because on-prem and cloud environment are really different in how things happen there, because in a traditional on-prem environment we would basically have a lot of resources that we can use in any way we want. When we provision something in cloud environment, we're starting to pay for it. So that's important part.
Yes, and like you said, exactly. In cloud we have a different sorts of things available, and for us that can help us with the effective governance. So like we mentioned some of them, management group policies and blueprints and cost management, resource graph, and some others as well in Microsoft 365, like archiving and retention and etc. etc. But let's take a look at the bigger picture, at the high level overview of Azure governance architecture. So what do you think, Mustafa? So Azure governance architecture practically is the foundation, like we've seen before. So there's Azure Resource Manager, there's Policy Engine, and then there's the actual a layer that actually talks to the underneath data center with the services themselves, like virtual machine, storage network, etc., etc. We can communicate with the layer via different tools like Portal, CLI, and third-party tools. But then there was where the Azure blueprints and resource graph comes in. So there's where actually we are controlling the things from. But
yep.
Yes.
Sorry for jumping in, but basically this is like Azure Resource Management Model is what everything in Azure nowadays rely on.
Exactly.
Way before we actually had a Azure Standard Model that was kind of different, and when we introduced Azure Resource Manager, everything is relying on that layer. Like all the communication, everything is working through that nowadays, and all those things, like even the tools that we are using, like Azure Portal, CLI, or some third-party tools, they are all going to rely on Azure Resource Management. And like these tools, different tools like policies, blueprints, graph, is basically something that relies on that, and it's built basically on top of the ARIA.
Exactly. And then we have on the top of it, we first mentioned management groups. Can you tell us something about that as well?
So basically, management groups are there to provide some kind of structure and hierarchy inside of our layer. So what is important here is to understand how our Azure is structured. So basically, on top of everything lies tenant, and tenant is basically directly connected to Azure Active Directory. So there we are going to have tenant and associated Azure Active Directory together with it. Then we can have multiple subscriptions that we can structure in different ways, separate them in different order, and so on. Now, management groups are coming in to give us a little more structure on how can we group them and how can we manage our resources. So there are a lot of ways and a lot of strategies how we can organize our Azure resources. So that's something that was introduced with the ARIA model as well. Something that we can have like a hierarchy of how resources are organized. So we have, as I said, tenant, then we are having a subscription beneath it, and then beneath the subscription we have resource groups and resources. Now, management groups are allowing us to group subscriptions in a similar way and have groups of subscriptions that are going to provide us a different structure. For example, if you're taking like some kind of big organization that is trying to separate things based on the departments, application, and so on, so on, so on. Having a subscription per department or sub-organization or something sometimes is not enough. Many of those organizations or departments need multiple subscription for different environments, different applications, and so on. So what management groups allow us is to have that structured as well. So we can group certain subscriptions that are logically tied together and group them in management groups and basically apply hierarchy approach to them. So basically any kind of access and controls and different things will be applied on all of them based from top down.
Yeah, that's the previous slide. I was just referring to as you were speaking. Like you said, we can have multiple of subscriptions, and depending on what we are using them for, and what if sometimes different departments can use different subscriptions, like you mentioned, and for better organization. You've also mentioned different scopes as well. So
Yep.
you've mentioned the hierarchy, yes?
Yeah. Basically, that's what we are doing here. So basically, we can have a better hierarchy. We can have different scopes and organize our subscriptions in a similar way. Like this model is often familiar to people through the different, like the resource group model. Like when we have a single subscription, then we are going to group resource group in it and so on. Now, this is just big creating one step up as more large organizations are coming into Azure and migrating their stuff there. So basically, subscription is sometimes not enough, both from like quotas, because they have certain limits on certain type of resources per subscription, and both on organizational structure, they need something bigger. This is where management groups step in and allow us to apply similar model of hierarchy in the same way, but on subscription level.
Yes, basically, this shows us a general guide how to use actually scoping different things. So we would use like management groups to enforce best practice and compliance policy. We will mention policy right away after that, and then resource group scopes for users that are managing resources. So. And then we have also the resource groups where actually and the resources themselves where actually we can use a resource scope for automated process and so on. So both subscription and resource group levels are used for user permissions. So in this case, we mentioned also Azure policy. So let's just take a look at what we have. In Azure policy, so Azure policy is actually, like we've seen before, can give us the control and governance scale for all the Azure resources that we have. We will also mention some differences between Azure policy and other things that we have in Azure for governance. So we can apply policies at scale. We can apply through the at different management groups through across the entire organization, and to different management groups we can apply different policies, multiple policies, and also we can tie together policy and aggregate them with some policy initiatives. So the policies and policy initiatives are actually the policy definitions and that define the actual scope of the policy. We can also define the exclusion of the policies if we want so. But the point is that we can use the policy to and turn them on. We don't have to turn them on, but we can have them. And for example, we have some already built in out of the box. And of course, we can tailor policies to enforce compliance and governance for the things that are not already defined. So, for example, we can say, let's say one department, that is the development department, will have possibility to use only a specific set of virtual machines. For example, the biggest virtual machines in the special tiers, And while the other IT pro or some human resource department will have a limited set of availability for the virtual machine tiers. So we can then enforce that compliance. For example, also we can enforce some naming conventions throughout the different management groups and so on and so on. And then we also can do some periodic scan and evaluate these policies if they are compliant or not, and then apply them as well. So we have an overview of how these things work. And of course, we can then automate things and remediate through the roundbooks, function, logic apps, etc., whatever is available for us, and actually trigger an alert. For example, a resource is out of compliance, so someone created a resource that is not following the policy. So it can trigger, for example, sending an email to the administrator, or it can just remediate for that automatically. So it's up to us how can we respond for that. But the good thing is that the policies also apply to different things. For example, we will mention also, well, recently Azure DevOps is mentioned more frequently because of the security, and that's where actually in governance, that's where actually policies can jump in. Mustafa, you have experiences with Azure DevOps, yes?
Yeah, definitely. So basically, when we're talking about DevOps, it comes to one of the first slides. DevOps is trying to increase the speed of the cycle of shifting everything to the left, creating everything faster. So it's everything about speed, and it's really important to maintain the speed in this regard. So basically, we want to enable DevOps process to go as fast as possible. And during that, we want to do some pre-flight validation authoring. We want to ensure that everything is on pair. We want to make sure that resources have some kind of naming policy that are maybe deployed in pre-approved regions, that they are using certain size of resources, certain SKUs, and so on. These are kind of things that we want to check. Then it can go to the security settings and that sort of thing. And it's important that these checks and security can be part of DevOps process. Now, what usually happens is that it comes to the end, and this is where Azure policies can help us to use policies as a code and shift basically things more to the left and get all these checks, security validations, and so on included in the process earlier. So basically, as we are treating policy as a code, they are going to be part of build test before we actually start deploying things and so on. So basically, it's ensuring that our process is right where it should be, and that everything is prepared when we are talking about Azure infrastructure in a way that we actually want that environment to operate.
So we are practically making things compliant before they are deployed and operated. Yes, that's
exactly. That's the point, because
earlier in the stage. Yes,
we want to include this as early as possible, and we are shifting it to the left,
right,
so we can make sure that it's going to be compliant before it actually ends up in production or any kind of environment.
Exactly. And what is actually used? Where can we use that? So, for example, the Azure policy. Would you like to say something, or like we've seen? So Azure policy is a service, yes, and we can use that to create, assign, and manage policies and initiatives as well. And we've seen that Azure policy runs evaluations and scans for non-compliant resources, and that can we tie some action to that as well. So the advantages are numerous, like like Mustafa, you said, it's the code is compliant before it ships actually. And for example, that's one use case. The other use cases might be allowing different resource type, like we mentioned before, or some virtual machines queues, let's say, or restrict locations where can we use actually our virtual machines. So, for example, we can enforce to use VMs or locations that are just tied to EU or US, for example. That's
Yeah,
one
that's this
thing.
really often case for a lot of companies. For example, when we're discussing EU, a lot of organizations, because of the GDPR and everything else, want to ensure that resources are kept inside the European Union, and basically we can create policies that are going to allow users to create only resources in those pre-approved data centers, basically choosing only those that are inside the EU.
And also some naming conventions, for example, require tags and values, yes, for compliance. Just imagine, well, you can tell, you do a lot of things in Azure, and you can tell if someone is not compliant and if it's not following, for example, naming convention or tagging convention. Have you had any experiences with that where all the resources are not tagged or named correctly?
Absolutely. That's kind of a nightmare scenario that you
Yeah.
want to avoid. Everything is fine when we are just like exploring Azure. But in my experience, a lot of organizations start exploring and then just they don't like throw that away and start from scratch. They just start building up upon it.
Yeah.
And when we don't have some kind of tagging and naming convention inside our subscription, it's going to be a nightmare real soon, because people are going to provide different names. No one is going to know what those resources are used for, who created them, why are they even used, and so on. So it's creating a multiple issues. First of all, in terms of structure and maintenance and control, in
Right.
terms of security and those sort of things, but also it's getting out of hand when we're discussing cost management and those
Right.
sort of things.
Right.
So it's really important to have control over those things early on,
And you probably,
as early as
yeah,
possible.
you probably know when you know that when you create a VM, and then when you create a VM, there are a lot of resources created, like IP address, network, storage disk, and something. So you probably encountered, we talked about that. Let's say storage. So we have a hard disk or we have a storage account, and then after 3 months there are like tens or hundreds of storage accounts that you don't know where they belong, or because VMs are deleted. But for example, VHDs stay here, and storage accounts are there and consuming money and IP addresses and everything. So, and if you don't follow the naming convention, you don't know where it belongs. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Both tagging and naming convention is really important, that part, because it can tell us where that resource belongs and what is it actually attached to. So basically, we can do a cleanup when necessary and remove unused resources.
And implementing is very easy. Yes. So
Yeah.
it's practically we have policy definitions, and then create initiative definition, and then we scope the definition. It means that we scope it to the management group or the resource group, and so on, and then see the results. But let's say we mention also RBACs, and then these are just a few differences between policies and RBACs. So policies control what can be done regardless of the user. For example, the types of VMs that can be provisioned, and RBACs actually control who can do that. So it's specific to that user. And while policies control are focusing on resource properties, they RBACs actually focuses on user actions and so on. So the policies are one big difference is that the default is allow and explicit deny. Well, is the vice versa with RBAC. So default is deny and explicit allow, and it's very simplified simplified model. So it's Azure RBAC versus Azure policy. So we can see that the actual RBACs here are on the top of everything. Yes. So it's RBAC manages actually who has access, and Azure policies focuses on resource properties. But there we have some other things as well, like Azure blueprints. Yes.
Okay, now Azure blueprints are kind of a tool that can help us take advantage of Azure policies in best possible way. What Azure blueprints allow us to is basically streamline environment creation. We can control when we are creating a new subscription, we can control what is going to happen there. We can automatically apply policies. We can automatically apply role access controls using role-based RBAC, and basically we can add some kind of default resources and those sort of thing by default when creating subscription. So it's basically helping us to create new environment and apply all rules and policies that we want to be applied on that specific subscription.
And then we have practically it's like photocopying the subscription. Yes.
It's not really photocopying. It's basically creating a basic template. So we have a template of a subscription, similar to what we are like when we are creating resources, we are using ARM templates. Now, Azure Blueprints is basically an ARM template. Let's say it's not exactly the ARM template, but it's providing some kind of template for creating subscription by creating role-based access controls, pre-applied and basically applied on the subscription level by default, and creating some policy definitions that we have pre-approved for us on some level, and applying those policies to subscription by default.
And these are the differences. Yes.
Yeah. Basically, they are really similar on how they're doing, but like for example, template is going to be a deployment thing, but for blueprints it's for full resource lifecycle. And basically for the templates are managed outside of Azure, and blueprints are managed and versioned inside of Azure. Templates are deployed to a resource group. Blueprints are deployed to a subscription level. On templates, we don't have tracking of deployments, but for blueprints, every deployment is tracked. And finally, resources can be changed afterwards, but resources are locked against changes on the blueprint level.
Yeah, and then we covered pretty much of the governance and controlling. Well, we still have to mention something in Azure. There are also two things that we'd like to mention, although very briefly. It's resource graph and cost management. So practically, Azure Resource Graph, it's a service in Azure actually that extends ARM or Azure Resource Management, and also it enables us. We have the possibility to query the resources across the multiple subscriptions. So we can manage or govern our the whole environment. So can do complex grouping, complex sorting, complex filtering, and explore, seeing the detail that we made changes, and also we can see the impact of the policies that we applied, and et cetera, et cetera. So practically, we can explore, analyze, and also see what's been there and what's been applied. And one other thing is also it's very important, and I think you'd agree on that one. It's the cost management, because it's people sometimes, well, you probably encounter that as well. At least I am. People come from four walls on premises mindset into Azure, and they over provision, and they think they come into the cloud with thinking of the on premises. So they don't tailor their resources to their needs, but actually they tend to over provision. And that's where the cost management helps. So it's Azure Advisor, cost management, and everything. That actually cost management things means Azure Advisor and tracking the cost, because it is very important. So the point is that you go into the cloud because you want to be either or, speedier, faster, and do some things cheaper. Well, cheaper doesn't actually mean sometimes actually that it will be cheaper, but that extra cost that you pay will actually enable you to go over the limit of the on-premises thing. So in order to become more successful, more faster, and more agile than before, of course, that you have a little bit to pay for it, but you don't have to over provision. So it's you can always stay in control of your cost by doing some cost management, and there we have some very good tools for that, and that are either free or paid, but tracking usage and cost trends, it's or detecting anomalies and forecasting spend, and it's very important. Then
I would like for this, like we mentioned it, I did before, and you did again. Like, it's really different how we're managing resources and how much they cost us in on-prem and cloud
yeah.
environment. Like, because in cloud everything is there when we need it. We don't
Mhm.
need to over provision. When we are doing on-prem environment, it takes, like, we need to think in advance, because when we are designing new service, new system, we need to think what's going to happen in that 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, or whatever. Because if we don't have enough resources to run when, like, workloads increase, we're going to get in trouble, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of procedures to get new resources. In cloud, it's not like that. But in the cloud, we are paying for the resources when we are using them. So basically, over provisioning is basically telling it means that we are paying for something that we don't need. So we need to keep that under control. And Azure Cost Management can tell us if we are using something or overpaying something. It's basically doing an analysis of our services and utilization, and can basically create some kind of recommendations of either increasing, decreasing, or changing SKUs, and so on. Now, another thing that is really important in Azure Cost Management, that we have option to do budgeting. So basically, we can do with Azure Cost Management, we can limit the basically budget, or basically how much each resource group or subscription can spend over the next period of time. So we can create a budget for, I don't know, for a month, for a quarter, 6 month, a year, and apply it for different department, different application, and say, once we are reaching 90%, alert me. I'm not sure if I want to spend so much money on certain application, or certain resources. So it's really important that aspect of the cost management, how it can help us track the cost and tell us how much different divisions, teams inside our organization are actually spending.
Yeah, and then one way to control that would be also uh, RBAC as well, and then uh, yeah. So it's would you like to say something about that as well?
Yeah, basically, we mentioned rollback a couple of times, but it basically is a way to apply access and controls. You kind of explained a lot of it when we did a comparison to policies. So
Hmm.
basically, role-based access controls are providing certain scope, certain roles to users, what kind of actions they can perform and on which level. So as we mentioned before, top of the level is going to be a management group, and
Sorry.
below the management group we are going to have a subscription, and below then again resource groups, and then below resource groups resources. So basically, if we apply certain action, and there are many different pre-built roles inside Azure with the role-based access controls, and we can even create a custom one if that is not enough. So if we say that certain user is an owner of the management group, it's going to be automatically applied throughout the hierarchy from top to down. So basically applying user to management group as an owner, he's going to be owner of everything below it, all the subscriptions, all resource groups, all resources. Now, if we apply users actions to user role to a specific subscription, that will apply only to that specific subscription, and it will not be applied to other subscriptions in the same management group. And same can be said about resource groups, where one resource group role doesn't like transfer to the other resource groups. And even if we are allowing users to control certain resource inside the resource group, user is going to be able to control only that specific resource, but not the rest of the resources in that specific group.
And that also applies also for the users that are able to control the subscriptions, different ones. Yes.
Yeah.
And yeah, for example, like in this one, is each subscription is actually linked to one Azure AD directory. So that's our tenant. So Azure subscription is actually a billing boundary. So that's what it is, and each billing boundary can actually have different billing types. So for the one you might have for Azure subscription one, you might have Azure credits. And for Azure subscription 2, you might have a credit if you're an MCT, and for the other one, Azure subscription 3, you might have pay-as-you-go option, and etc. etc. So
Yeah, it's
you
very
also,
important, and we're
yeah.
discussing this. Like, there are a lot of different ways to how you're gonna do your subscription, how you're gonna pay for it, and there are like different. The most usual one is pay as you go, and you just swipe your card and you charge at the end of the month. But there are kind of different like contracts that you can sign through enterprise agreements, where you can say, okay, I want this specific subscription to be cheaper for virtual machines. So you're going to get a deal that your virtual machine is going to be cheaper, but like platform as a service services are going to be much more expensive in that specific subscription. And
Mm-hmm.
for the other subscription, you can have a deal when you said, okay, I want Azure SQL databases to be cheap, and I don't want to use virtual machines here. So their virtual machines are going to be much more expensive, and so on. So there are different rules and different ways you can actually do that, and have different boundaries based on those. Yeah.
But speaking about users and identities, we also have something that's called identity governance as well. So the identity governance, what it is, it's actually managing or governing the identities throughout the organization to achieve a balance between productivity. So, for example, identity governance means also how quickly can a person have access to a certain specific resource that they need. For example, when let's imagine that a user joins an organization, how long does it take for that user to obtain a mailbox, and then a SharePoint site, and then the OneDrive, or get installed specific programs, and so on. So how the access will change over time. So what happens when the user go on a sick leave? What happens with the user when and the user resources and the company resources when user leaves the company? So what happens? For how long the data of the user will be retained, etc., etc. So that's the actual identity lifecycle talks about, and identity governance is all about. And
So
also the we also have the today the identity is actually the control plane. So there is a way how we can control that. Yes. Please.
So yeah, one thing that people are often forgetting about this cycle is basically people are always thinking about moving forward and catching up the speed. Like how fast does I get permissions that I'm required to do my job? But a lot of people are forgetting about very important second very important part of it is basically a cleanup. So when I
Hmm.
move from the first job role to the second job role, do I still need same permissions I had for my first job role? So
Exactly.
basically,
Exactly.
it's really important that we do a cleanup and that we do a revision, an audit of roles and access policies, because once people get certain roles, certain privileges, they are rarely removed. They are just catching up and getting new ones. And we need to keep in mind that we want to clean up and revision if the user move to a different department, to a new role. Does that user still need all permissions as well?
You mentioned access before for that for the users for these
Okay.
that are roaming, for example.
Oh yeah, that's I love this part and how Azure Active Directory works and how we can control certain things and because user identity changed a lot once we moved out of our four walls. So, like, identity is much more vulnerable today because when we're talking about identity, it's actually it's not for something that is inside our company for resources in our own data center. It's something. All those resources are in the cloud, and basically we can access them from anywhere. So we need to keep track of how user is accessing something and when something is actually allowed. So we can create a lot of rules and create a different kind of access rules for different types of situations. So uh, I think we need to agree that MFA is kind of like a baseline today for everything in the cloud.
Number
Anything,
one, number
yeah,
one,
it
yes.
should be like a first thing, but we don't want to overdo it with the MFA for users because, like, if they are asked for the MFA each time they are trying to access something, they are going to be annoyed. So we can create a different kind of conditional access rules and say when something is required or not required and so on. So we can create those rules based on different set of circumstances. So basically, if the user is coming from company known device, we can like play it a little loose and say, okay, MFA is required for I don't know every 30 days. Or if the user is coming from company network, we can say, okay, again, if it's like it's okay to be once every 30 days. Or if user is coming from inside the company from the company owned device, then we want to say, okay, again, 30 days. But if the user is coming from his personal device from unknown network but from the same city, then we say, okay, we can let you access certain resources only if you provide MFA access. And if user is coming from unknown device that might even not be compliant with our own rules, and it's coming from totally unknown IP address from third country where user is probably not going to be to at, we can like mark that access try a risk and block the access at all, not provide user with the access to the resources. So conditional access can help us control different situations, different type of situations, and create rules that are going to be a little loose and allow user certain things or block access if we find it suspicious.
And practically, yes, that's it. So the conditional, like you said, the access is based on a different condition. So conditional access can be applied based on device state, application sensitivity. So any of these things, device state and application sensitivity and location and user rules. So based on for example, if we have one user that is a sales account representative, then that user accesses the usually from belongs to a London user groups, and the configuration of the user conditional access configuration belongs to the corporate user. Let's say it's a this type of setting specific to this setup, and then accesses the resources from London, and that's the usual working place for that user. And his or her last sign in was 5 hours ago, so that's okay with that. So that's the user state. Then if then the device state is identified or questioned. So device platform compliance and active threats. So for example, device Windows is one of the allowed configurations. So if user access from the anonymous IP, that might raise some an eyebrow or alert. And if the last sign in was 5 hours ago from London, and now it's seen in somewhere in Asia, which is practically physically impossible, because that's kind of action that's called impossible travel. And plus, if the health is compromised, then the risk level goes from low to medium and then to high. So when the sign in and user risk is medium or high, we can then turn on the things like Mustafa said. Let's say trigger MFA again or block user and so on. So either allow access, deny access, force password reset, and limit access and require MFA and so on. And then of course it's not only about Azure, it's also about Microsoft 365. But these things are today intertwined more or less, but there are some few things that we'd like to say that belong to Microsoft 365 as well. One of these is archiving in Microsoft 365, very important thing. So would you like to say any few things about that, or for archiving?
You're more in the Microsoft 365 field, so you take
yeah,
this one.
I mean, it's well, we just have two things to say. But anyway, speaking of, we'll go back to the to some other things that important in Azure if we have time. So there's archiving in Microsoft 365 or Office 365 that is also called in-place archiving. So it's also very important tool for governance. So when you actually enable archiving, it's a very simple tool or feature that you just enable it, and then when you enable it, when you turn it on, then these mailboxes are turned on. Then user can access and store any kind of message in the archive. But the point is that archive mailbox is not actively synchronizing. So we can store the emails in there. Mails from the primary mailbox can be then moved to archive. So we can set a automatic rule. The archive mailbox is practically not cached on the client computer, so we don't take additional space. So that's also useful because of the speed that the Outlook opens, and then the number of emails that we have to deal with. And then it is also protected from accidental or malicious deletion, and that's very important as well. So and if we accidentally delete it, then we also can use the recoverable items folder for that. So there's also the other thing that we want to mention is the retention policies. And the retention policies actually in Microsoft 365 can help us achieve different goals. So comply with the industry regulations and policies, reduce risk of, for example, if we have some litigation or security breach, we can then reduce our risk in the event of that things, and also stay agile. So there are a few rules how these things work. So we have a retention date and deletion dates. Then if we have both set up, then the retention wins over deletion. So if deletion is set up for mailbox items to expire after 9 years, then retention over 6, and then retention wins over deletion. And the longer retention period wins if we have multiple of them. And then there's also a strongest deletion period is also that at the end wins on that. So we don't. I don't think we have time for that for demos. But just what I wanted to say is, yeah, we do have. We do have some things more to say, but unfortunately we ran out of time, and 50 minutes it's too little. But Mustafa, please, would you say some closing words for?
Yeah, as you said, 50 minutes is not enough. This is a really broad topic, and they are making these slots shorter just to shut us up. So yeah, this is basically just a scratch on the surface. There's a lot of more on this, and we could probably spend days discussing each of those topics we covered here today. But this is just to give you a brief insight into it and get you thinking and start exploring the options yourself.
All right, I'd like to thank you for staying with us today, and Mustafa.
Yeah, thank you for your time and hope you enjoyed our session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.